Hi, and welcome to Aspirations and Dreams, our new podcast. Really excited this morning to be having our first podcast with a live guest. Our guest is someone that really doesn't need any introduction, but someone who has really set his mark in terms of establishing an empire in preemptive mental health, spoken to over 80,000 people over 10 countries, and I'm certainly one of those 80,000 people that have been directly affected by the work that this gentleman has put in place. Really excited and really proud to introduce our first guest to Aspirations and Dreams, the CEO and founder of Happiness Co, Mr. Julian Pace. So, mate, thank you for joining us here on Aspirations and Dreams, our first podcast. As is going to be the tradition for our podcast, we're going to start off with gratitude, something that you've certainly been teaching me. So thought we'd kick off today with my gratitude, which is obviously launching of the Aspirations and Dreams podcast. Be keen to hear what your gratitude is for today.
I love that. What a great way to start, mate. My gratitude for today is just being here with you all in this incredible space, which is Happiness Co. And you know, you walk down the hallway there and you've got some incredible people trying to make a difference in people's lives. So every time I rock up here, it's a great reflection. So I'm very grateful for that. It's
quite an interesting work environment, isn't it? When you have so many people dedicated, I guess, to the pursuit of one vision, one goal. And that is, as you know, you've said so many times, 10 million people in 10 years. It's a pretty audacious goal, but all those people are really out there trying to do it.
Well, it comes back to that thing, right? It's like if you're not waking up every day trying to make someone else's life a little better, then you're kind of wasting your time. So it's pretty awesome to have that infectious quality and environment that we have here at the Co. And yeah, it's unique because it's uncommon, you know, to have so many people dedicated to that one cause, which is pretty epic.
Yeah, and it's certainly an amazing feeling to be part of that now. So, mate, what we're going to do is we're going to break this into a number of segments so that we can kind of get your story. I'm going to ask you to go through your story, which I've heard now several times, but each time I hear it, I think it's an important thing for me, as I hear something a little different or I take something a little different each time. But I'm really kind of interested as you're going through to look at what that critical moment of impact was when you got to that point in your life where you said, I can't do this in this way any longer. So I want to explore that with you.
Of course.
And I also want to talk about what those catalysts for change were. So you often talk about the need for hope, and I think, you know, we all need that. But in the midst of despair, where does one find hope? So I'm kind of interested to know in your particular story where that hope came from that led you from where you were to the amazing man that you are today. So over to you, mate. Tell us the Julian Pace story.
Yeah. Firstly, again, thanks for having me. And yeah, everyone's got a story. So I always like to set the scene that everyone listening to this right now has a story, and that story is got ups and downs and rounds, and it's got pain, it's got suffering, it's got hope and joy. Every story of life has that, and mine's no different. And my story is not unique in any way, but other than what I've done with the story, and that's the key. What could you do with a story? That everyone feels heartbreak in their life, and some people take heartbreak and go on to build incredible happiness and joy and fulfillment, and some people feel heartbreak and build misery, sadness, pain, and suffering. And what is the difference? And what I learned probably along the journey is it's one's philosophy, which is one's meaning on what happened to them. You know, there's people in the world right now, Baz, are going through worse than us, doing better than us. You know, it's not, you don't have to look far to find someone going through tough times in their life and being incredible people still. And that's probably where my life started to transition from what I had gone through that had broke my heart to finding a way to find hope again. And I can unpack that a little more later on. But in terms of the overall story, yeah, I lost my father to suicide on my 21st birthday. And that broke me because my dad and I were really close. He had taught me so much along the way and had been such a good friend and role model. And more importantly, you know, your parents are your parents and you love them unconditionally. So to lose someone that was such a big part of me, I felt like I completely crumbled when he had left. You know, my happiness, my joy, my purpose. And you know, for a young man growing up, your dad's really a North Star for you. You know, the integrity, the person that you want to make them proud. You know, his validation. So the validation of for me from him. So seeking that love and approval from him was really big as a young man. And then once he was gone, it seemed like my life had no purpose. So that was really where it started.
So Julian, the losing of your father under any circumstances would be difficult. The losing of your father to suicide. But you tell the story that not only did those tragic events happen, it followed an argument between the two of you. How did that leave you feeling, obviously, subsequent to that?
Yeah, there's one thing that we always have responsibility to take ownership of, which is the choices that we make and the things that we say. And I say this now, and I learned it the hardest way possible. There's two things that you can't change in this life: the words that come out your mouth and the things that you do. So get better at the words that come out your mouth and get better at the things that you do, because regardless of how people treat you, Barry, you've still got that fundamental choice. In a world full of unkind people, you can choose to be kind anyway. And yeah, I was so hurt by my dad for the 2 years leading up to that I was angry at him. But I loved him as well. And have you ever been angry at someone before and still loved them?
Yeah.
It's common, right? Love and anger quite often go together, because the people who make us angry and hurt us are the ones that we care about most. So I was so angry with him, but I loved him, and it led me to having an argument with him and saying some things that I wasn't proud of, you know, things that weren't kind, and things that I probably was saying because I wanted to hurt him. And because the truth is, hurt people hurt people. And looking back, I didn't know I was trying to hurt him. But in the moment, I remember just being so angry that I wanted him to understand what I was feeling the way I was feeling.
Yeah, that pain. That
pain, right? And then you say some things to get that response that you're after. And then, sadly enough, a few days later, he took his life. And that was what I call the moment of impact, that catalyst of your life just falls apart. Because the moment that I recall is that moment and the things I said and the things that I did, but the unforgiving nature of loss and despair, it can leave you quite hollow.
Was there two sides to that grief in terms of A, losing your father, and B, the shame or the guilt of what you'd said as well? Were there two things that you had to deal with? Yeah,
shame and guilt cripple most people, mate. And there's a lot of emotions that we feel on a daily basis, but the ones that become most crippling in nature are shame and guilt. And shame is the stuff that we keep in the shadows, the things that we don't want people to know about us.
Yeah.
Because that fear of judgment, I'm not going to be loved, I'm not going to be good enough, I don't get your approval. So that fear, that shame keeps our stuff in the shadows. And then the guilt's the stuff that we do. Like when we treat someone poorly and we feel bad about it, that's guilt. And I had these two emotions that really destroyed my life, because shame, I didn't want people to know what I said, and guilt, that I knew what I did and I felt guilty for it. And because of that, your story changes. And we all have stories, and we tell stories. And my story changed because I started to tell myself that my dad had died and he was dead because of me. And you wonder what type of choices that you make when that's the story that you tell. So for everyone listening, your story defines your choice. It's the step before action. So what you tell yourself determines what you do. So what happened to my life after that was pretty clear and pretty obvious because of the story I told myself.
And so what was the story that you were telling yourself at that point, straight after?
Yeah, it was my fault.
Yeah.
I blame myself. And I've never seen someone hate themselves so quickly. Like, I'm not talking about hating my dad. I'm like, within a second. Like, for someone that was growing up as a young man and trying to work out the person he wanted to be, I'm still, I'm only 21 at this stage. Yeah. And then that moment defined me in a second. It became, I hated myself so much, everything about myself. And all the joy, all the love, all the purpose, all the friendships that I seemed to have before all fell apart. And that was all my own doing, but I just couldn't seem to find a way out of the suffering. And
so what was the course of action that you took with your life, with all that you were carrying? I mean, that seems an enormous burden for a 21-year-old.
Yeah,
for anybody.
The obvious stuff, drugs and alcohol. But the drugs and alcohol, when you're hurting and you're not dealing with how you feel and you're using drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism, what type of choices do you make? Poor ones, right? So I hurt my friends, I hurt my family, I pushed away good people. And then, but you justify it. You justify, people let you down, or you push people away so much, then they leave you, and then you justify that people leave you. And everything was about backing up this story that I was abandoned. That was the underlying story of it all, because I told myself, well, the one person that's supposed to love you unconditionally and always be there for you is your dad and mum. And then because he left, I was just showing myself and justifying to my own limiting belief that people were always going to leave me. And that's what they did, because I made them.
Yeah.
I made them leave. I opened the door and shoved them out. And then I said, see, people leave me anyway. And that was the story for the next 5 years or so.
And so, and you don't have to go into it in any detail, but that wasn't the only tragedy following your father, was it? You suffered quite a lot of grief in the next year or two, I think it was.
Yeah, mental health is a complex beast, right? It's something that it consumes so many of us and doesn't discriminate at all. And 2 years later, I lost my best friend to suicide. And that was just like a knockout blow for me, because when you're trying to create meaning in this world and you're trying to recover from your loss anyway and your grief, and I wasn't coping with that very well, absolutely terrible actually. I had no coping mechanisms at all, just drugs and alcohol. And I don't talk about him a lot anymore in my career because, dad's enough from a mental health perspective. Yeah. But when I think about T, I think about him a lot, I think about him every day actually, but he was there through all that grief with me. Think about that one solid that you have. You can do drugs and do alcohol, and all the poor choices I made, he was always there to make the poor choices with me because he didn't want me to be alone.
Yeah.
And I then felt a sense of guilt in that, because imagine that mate that just loves you so much that will go to the end of the earth for you and back. And then you start becoming destructive in your own behavior, and he follows you down that path because he loves you and he doesn't make it through. And that's another burden to bear, because you're like, what if I didn't make these poor choices and I didn't make him come down the path with me? Would he have made different choices in his life and still be here today? So when he started, taking heaps of drugs and a heap of alcohol, his mental health started to become depleted.
Yeah.
And he couldn't cope, and then he ended his own life. And it's something that I always think about. I wonder if I didn't make them poor choices, would have he followed me down the same path?
And the reason I ask it is not obviously to raise an issue that's painful, but I often wonder that when we get into our headspace around shame and guilt, we expect life to punish us. And I kind of wonder whether those events that happened after your dad's suicide, whether you actually ever thought about, well, I'm an awful person, I'm now being punished by these awful things that are happening to me. Did you focus on those at all?
Yeah, I thought that life was out to get me.
Yeah.
I thought that life was unfair. I thought that, bad things were happening to me all the time. That was the world I saw. And then I thought that it was unfair because life kept taking things that I cared about. My friends, my dad, my own dignity, my own respect, and then you get left with nothing. And in life, things get taken from you.
Yeah.
But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. And there's nothing that teaches you how to lose things. Most importantly, the things that you care about. But when you start to lose a sense of who you are, that's where you really lose your way. Like your sense of identity. And sometimes we have our identity attached to things and people.
Yeah.
And that was definitely me, because no one taught me any different. Well, my dad's gone, my best mate's gone. And then it becomes this poor me mentality. I definitely saw that too, which is like, oh, look how bad my life is. I've lost my dad and my best mate to suicide. No one gets it.
So you became the victim?
Absolutely became the victim. Like no one understood what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And that was another part of the destruction, because I just felt I wasn't understood.
Right.
And to be honest, people struggled to understand the complexities of the challenge, which is, shit, that is pretty bad that your dad killed himself. And it's, oh, wow, you and your best mate. So when I would talk to people, I'd feel that even though they would listen, I never found any closure in the talking or the therapy. I never found what I was looking for in people listening to me, because I found that it was just left me more questions than answers.
Yeah.
And that's where I really started to understand that what I was looking for was in all the wrong places. I had to go internal. The things I was searching for were the answers within myself, but I was searching for other people to tell me it was going to be okay, or that it's going to get better, or, this is what it's going to be for you after you lose the things that you care about. And I guess I was looking for someone else's permission to make me feel happy again, or looking for someone else's permission for me to be miserable.
Odd question, but were you happy being miserable?
I don't know if I was happy being miserable, but I was okay being miserable.
Yes, you deserved it.
Yeah, I was okay being there.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's the punishment I deserved.
Yes.
So after what I said to my dad, to me, that was fair.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like karma.
Yeah, okay.
Like, this is all you get, by the way, because of the poor things that you've done.
Yeah.
And that's when your belief system is so powerful, and that belief system can change in a second.
So let's get on to that. So if the road forward for you was just a single road, which was going to be of misery, of being a victim, of terrible things happening in your life, obviously that's not how it's transpired. You're here today. What was that fork in the road? Can you remember what it was that you kind of made those choices, or that choice to go, I can continue this or I can take a new path?
Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly, because the things that we remember in our life are the things that bring us incredible amounts of pleasure and also incredible amounts of pain. And I suffered immensely. And one thing I'll share in my book in detail one day is that the amount of suffering that I endured, but it was self-imposed.
Right.
It was self-inflicted suffering, but I suffered nonetheless. And human suffering is a thing that debilitates anyone for long periods of time. And I've met so many people that never come out of it. You put yourself down a dark hole so very far that you can't find a way back. And that's why hope's so important to me, because in the darkest darks, all you need is a glimpse, a tad. And for me, leading up to finding hope was all about just feeling suicidal.
Yeah.
Of every waking moment of the day, thinking that, I remember walking down the coffee strip, the Albany Highway just here actually. This is why Happiness goes here. And I remember a night and there's all these buses coming past on the Vic Park coffee strip, and I'm thinking, would be so great if I just walked in front of this bus right now and ended it. And quite often I was taunting myself to end my own life, and in a way that I wanted to make it look like an accident. And this is not by any means, I talk about this at depth in our men's circles and other stuff that we do, but it was like I wanted to take my own life, but I didn't want it to seem like I killed myself, because I didn't want to do that to my mum.
Yeah.
So it's really, really grim when you start planning suicide, making it look like an accident.
Yeah.
Like, think about all the things that you might be coming up with. And to me, that was my escape. And then the more I kept thinking about it and the more I kept planning it, the realization was that I'm not going to make it. And the reason why this is super important, because I actually didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away.
Yeah.
And that's probably the misconception on people who suffer and try to attempt to take their own life. So the research would show this, and I'm just one of them, that people who attempt to take their own life actually don't want to die. People who try to kill themselves don't want to die. They just want the pain to go away.
Yeah.
So I see that with my dad. I see that with T. They probably didn't want to die. They just wanted the pain to go away, and they couldn't find a way to make it disappear.
Beyond that.
Yeah. So I recognized that in myself, because I'm like, I didn't actually want to leave all the things I still had. I just didn't know how to find a way back there.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to say sorry to my mum and say sorry to my sister and to my brother. I didn't know how to heal the relationship that I had burnt. I didn't know how to look at myself in the mirror and have a hard conversation. So I thought the road back to happiness was too long.
Yeah.
But that's where it really started for me, because then that self-preservation kicks in, which is like, mate, if you don't do something, by the way, you're not going to make it. There was like two sides of me, like the good and the bad, the darkness in you. And this is why, do you ever see that Heath Ledger portrait?
Yes.
And I resonated with it so much, because it's that like real dark version of him in his ear and the real light one.
Yeah.
And that's what it was like.
Yeah.
So if I ever had enough money to purchase that portrait, I'm going for it, because it speaks volumes to me, like the dark side of you and the light. And to me, the dark side was saying, do it, mate.
Do it.
You got nothing to live for.
And it's interesting you say that. I remember having a similar thought process, very clear not to commit suicide, but a constant fear of, if I don't wake up in the morning, that would be okay. And so it kind of lends itself to your theory, if you like, that it's not so much about dying, it's around just taking that pain away.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's all too much.
Yes, overwhelming.
How much can one person endure?
Yeah.
And that's, to me, I didn't think I was even strong enough to be able to process what was happening to me. Like it seemed enormous in magnitude.
Yes.
Like my reality as a young person, it seemed catastrophic in my universe. I think if you think world poverty, you think people have gone through much worse. It's their universe, right? My universe was, I just looked around and it just seemed like everything was falling apart.
So do you subscribe to the thought that you have to hit rock bottom before you can start to improve or start to heal?
Well, I think there's two reasons people change: pain and pleasure.
Yeah.
So pleasure and you want to, and pain and you have to. So either one you can subscribe to. Pain is that I absolutely need to change my life because I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like you see a lot of people change there.
Yeah.
And people change there because they've hurt so many people and themselves along the way. And it's like that moment of, realization that they've got to make it better. That happens a lot. And it's probably the most common one if you think about mental health.
Yes.
But I've also seen incredible people just work for pleasure, which is their kids, their family, their friends, their joy. There's a philosophy that is very different between both, that you don't need to hit rock bottom to have a great life. But there's a bunch of principles that I reckon people that fight for pleasure live for.
Yeah.
Principles being the things that they execute and they implement. The small things every day. There's an incredible thing about people who fight for pleasure and the people who try and drag themselves off the canvas.
Yeah.
And quite often they're more grateful. Quite often they have perspective. Quite often they know things will pass. They have a different philosophy on things.
Yeah.
So even though they may be going through tough times, and I've met many of these people, the way that they see these tough times, they have a completely different view on the world versus people who are waiting to hit rock bottom to change it. There's no right or wrong because I was the later. I was the rock bottom person.
Yeah.
But I learnt in my experiences that now when things come to me, I could never hit rock bottom again. Like absolutely never hit rock bottom again because rock bottom is an attitude. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
So this game of life is 80% psychology and 20% application. So I know in my own self that rock bottom is no longer an option for me because I now live in the part of fighting for pleasure, not pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess that's quite comforting because obviously you're still going to go through life and you're still going to have painful moments. You're still going to experience all the things that life deals us. But that must be quite comforting to know I now have the tools, the mindset, the psychology, the philosophy to go, I can deal with that.
And all that's changed is the way I see the world. That's just the magical part of this journey of your own improvement, that it's all internal. Like you have external problems and you have internal problems. If you master the internal problems, your external problems will become less. If you master how you feel about your own journey, if you master your own identity, if you master your relationship with money and you master your relationship with all the things that you've gone through, you start to see these problems very differently. So when I say you can't hit rock bottom once you change your standards, well, it's very hard to go back from what you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you know that a big part of how you see your life is your attitude towards it, then, well, if you work on your attitude, it's very hard to hit rock bottom. Doesn't mean heartbreak won't come.
No.
I just think that rock bottom part is where people give up. Think about someone that you know in your own journey. You throw in the white towel.
Yeah.
You fly the white flag. We are the person who gives up, and then we use this scenarios and settings to justify why. Oh, it happened again.
Yeah.
This always happens to me. It's never going to get better. Think about where that's driven
punished,
from.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
As such.
So you've been a massive part in the growth of so many people, me included. Was there a person that was your catalyst for change? Or was it you?
There was a few people that were significant.
Yeah.
My mum being one of them.
Yep.
And, I remember, a moment when I was younger, before I lost my dad, feeling like my world was falling apart. And I remember looking at him once and seeing no compassion and empathy in his eyes towards me. And that made it even harder because I'm like, how do you fix something and how do you heal something together if you have no compassion and empathy for each other anymore? And that made me feel more alone than anything else. Losing my dad was one thing, but before he had gone, I felt like I already lost him.
Yeah, right.
So the reason I share that part is because 5 years later, I had an argument with my mum and I realized that I became him. Like I had no compassion and empathy anymore for her. I could see her suffering and in pain because she told me, after all of this, and I remember her pain that she would go through. She wasn't suffering because she wasn't making poor choices, but she was in pain. Going to bed every single night thinking her son was never going to come home. That was what she endured.
Yeah.
And she tried to, communicate that to me, and I just met it with anger and frustration and blame.
You say in a lot of your presentations, we bleed on the people that never cut us. And that's a classic example.
Yeah, my mum was just trying to give me love, right? And I attacked her for it.
Yeah.
I treated her poorly because of it. The one who had always been there for me, I treated her poorly because of my anger towards the situation. So she was a big catalyst for change. Then me being proud of myself again was a second. Like I wanted to become a good person. I felt that was my driving factor, which is that long road to happiness that I talked about. I knew that I had felt happiness once before. And happiness is an interesting thing because I felt it many times growing up as a young person, as a young boy with my family, with my friends, playing football, pleasure and happiness along the way. But I didn't feel it for a good 5 years. It's like I shut off the account of happiness and I just didn't understand what it felt like anymore. So I knew I could probably get back to it. And then the third thing was probably there's a lot of people angry at my dad for what he did. And a lot of people see suicide as selfish. And there's probably a lot of people listening right now that think it still is. It's cowardly and all that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give him a bit more of a legacy than just that one moment. Because he had done so many great things before that.
Yeah.
And all that people remembered him for now, the guy that killed himself.
Were there people that were angry at you too, do you think?
I think people were angry at, I think it's easy to blame other people when bad things happen, right? So I think a lot of people like to point the finger. And there was definitely some internal family conflict about how individuals dealt with our dad before he died, and also towards me about how I dealt with him before he died. So I think that there's always going to be blame and anger towards people. But that's because fundamentally we're hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's so much easier to find blame in someone else rather than take responsibility for our own choices.
I mean, it's an amazing story, and to see where you are today is extraordinary, not just from your own development, but what you're able to part onto other people. And I say that from a personal perspective because you and Happiness Co and your team, the ambassadors, have become such a big part in my growth. So I know it is a mindset. I know it is about change. I'm going to change the pace a little bit because that's a pretty heavy opening to the show. So, mate, we're just going to put some time on the clock, and I'm just going to ask you some quick-fire questions, a little bit of light-hearted look at things, as honestly as you can. So we're good to go. Your first broken bone?
My left arm.
Left arm?
My brother pushed me out of a cubby house.
Why is it always brothers? I was going to ask you this one. First time you were allowed to put on makeup, but maybe that's for a different person. Your first car?
First car, Mitsubishi Lancer. It was green with green neons.
Wow. First celebrity crush?
Jessica Alba. Dark Angel.
Wow.
That was the TV show.
First girlfriend?
Oh, first girlfriend. Chantel.
How old were you and Chantel?
I reckon I was 16 at the time.
Wow. Okay. No tattoos?
No tattoos.
No piercings?
I had a piercing in my left ear when I was young.
All right.
My dad flipped out about it at the time, but I thought I was pretty cool.
First book you remember reading?
Oh. Think and Grow Rich, I remember, at about 25, 26. Was a good book.
Awesome. Thank you. That looks like our time. So, just kind of put a bit of a break there and get to know you just a little bit more. So, mate, the next part of this is really just kind of, we've looked at the past and what's moulded you into the man that you are today. I'm really keen to explore the future and to talk about hope, what your aspirations and dreams are now. What was your dream as a child? What did Julian Pace want to be?
Yeah, it's funny how your life goes in circles, because I remember growing up as a young person, and my mum will attest to this, being really concerned about the world.
Okay.
Like as a young person, like crying in my bed at night because I was worried about kids that were going to bed at night with no food and water. And I'd always had this feeling of trying to end suffering. As a young person, and my mum would call me an indigo child. So if you're not sure what an indigo child is, it's like someone who I guess is quite feeling orientated.
Yes.
And I remember that being a young person. So I guess it loops all the way back to after that trauma with my dad. I guess that part of me I found again was that pure. I think purity is the part of it. think about before life changes you and it beats you down.
So the innocence.
Yeah, the innocence of people. Like I think about my little daughter right now.
Yeah.
She's so pure. And you got to find a way back to that real essence of who you are. So for me personally, even though it was a long road and it was a tough battle, it felt like I had been there before. Like I felt that I had been a person before who cared about the world more than I cared about myself. And I felt like I wanted to end and support the world. Like if you're gonna be in this world, make a difference in it.
Yeah.
So when I started transitioning into that, like I had this ability to try to capture moments from when I was young, but also get super curious about what it could look like for me going forward. I had no idea that I was going to become a professional speaker. I had no idea I was going to work in mental health. I had none of these ideas set out yet. But hope starts with an idea.
So that kind of leads me to where I wanted to go in terms of where you are today. Is Julian Pace Happiness Co. Is that your identity? Is what you do your identity? Do you think?
I think people would see it as my identity.
I mean, you're known as the happiness guy.
Yeah, I think lots of people would see that, and I could understand exactly why they would have that perception. But Happiness Co. is well beyond me. It is a bunch of people. I guess if I go back to the start of Happiness Co., I built it for the goodness in this world. So I always think about the goodness in people. And where you see the goodness in people is when catastrophic things happen in the world.
Yeah.
This is where they talk about purity.
Yeah.
And I always use an example of terrorism. So these people go into these buildings and do terrible things, right? And then complete strangers run into burning buildings to save complete strangers' lives. There's no judgment. There's no attacking. There's no making you feel like a bad person. Our human instincts kick in, which is being a good human at our default. We default there when terrible things happen. All the other stuff is nonsense. So I think about Happiness Co. trying to be that purity in people. And for me, Happiness Co. is the best in humanity. And it's far from getting that right every day, but that's what I think about people. Yeah. The people who join the ranks, the people that we're trying to help. It's that constant reminder that there's goodness in this world and someone's got to fight for it.
So do you believe that your dreams have been met or succeeded because of your story or in spite of your story?
I just think it gives me a sense of resilience.
Okay. And
I also think it gives me a sense of understanding of why people become cynical in this world. Because what's the opposite of good? Bad. What's the opposite of light? Dark. And I can see why people become bad and sad and angry because of what they endure. So if Happiness Co. and the people that work at Happiness Co. could give people a sense of, hey, your life can be more than just what you've gone through. Imagine what you could do with it. And I remember what Oprah said once. She goes, I won't let the things that people did to me. I won't let the bad things that people did to me define the person I become. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
I won't let the bad things that people did to me define the person I become. And that's a really interesting thought. Like, well, who defines who you become? Only you.
You, yeah.
And everyone has that same choice. That's the thing about people. Everyone has the same choice to define who they want to become. But some people use what happened to them to justify the person they are now.
Which is that victim mentality, isn't it?
Absolutely. So for me, I'm like, I had that choice or I can change it. And that's when I started to get curious. Hope, as we talked about before, is that driving factor, because hope, you can't measure hope.
No.
But if you ever met someone before going through cancer and chemo, they need hope.
Yeah.
What about the people in Afghanistan right now? They need hope. There's one thing that you can't measure that gives people a fighting chance, though. The hope that I can get through this.
I guess the thing for me is it almost feels like a contradiction that in the midst of despair, someone can find hope. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know. And it intrigues me that all of us have that story of having that glimmer of hope in the midst of despair. And I find it a contradiction almost.
And do you know why? It's because every single person has good moments in their life. There's not one person that has never felt joy because it's impossible not to feel it. So at some moments in your life, you felt good.
Yeah.
You may not have a lot of good moments, but at moments you've felt good. You've laughed.
Yeah.
Even the saddest people on the planet laugh. So what we do is we try and recall things that have given us a sense of hope.
Bit of hope, yeah.
Like, I remember when I smiled once. Like think about it's a memory recall, right? It's
Yeah.
like we try and find moment, or we paint other pictures of, I saw Barry smile. And a lot of hope comes from being selfless,
Yeah.
which is when we think about hope, quite often we think about, well, how can I find it? Well, you can captivate it by doing good for others in a really powerful way, because finding hope in your own despair is difficult, but it's very profound. But finding a way to give other people hope in their despair will give you abundance of it.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
That's the key.
The key is to give more than you take. And it's like when you can give when you're suffering, it's easy to give when you're happy.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to give when you're in despair.
So some final questions. Simple questions, but I think very complex answers. Your definition of success?
Looking at yourself in the mirror and being okay with who you are. Like to me, that's key. Like it starts and ends there. It always starts and ends there. Because how many people have you met that have money that are miserable?
I think you posted something on Facebook the other day around success is not driving your Mercedes to a job that you hate.
Absolutely.
And I thought,
not.
what a wonderful, meme that was. And we kind of measure it like that, don't we?
Well, it's like that. You live in a nice house, but you drive every day to a job that you hate. And you're trapped in this world that you're so under pressure and you're unhappy and you have no time for your family and friends. And we justify that as success because we get nice things.
And we get money, yeah.
It's like, how back to front is this world? So for me, it's about the relationship you have with you. And you know what? You can BS everyone that you want in this world, but there's one person that you can't BS, and there's always one person keeping score.
Yeah.
You know how authentic you're being. You know if you're doing it for the wrong reasons. There's always one person that has a scoreboard in your life, and that's you.
Maybe a similar answer to this. Your definition of happiness?
Fulfillment, which ultimately comes down to the feeling.
Right.
It's like, so we coach and we train this at Happiness Co. What is fulfillment? And fulfillment comes down to a strong level of self-esteem. So self-esteem, the definition of self-esteem is the value and worth that one puts on self. Like, are you worthy? Do you value who you are? Because if you do, then you treat yourself pretty well.
Yeah.
And think about how many people don't treat themselves well. If you don't treat yourself well, then how are you supposed to sustain a happy life?
And you also give permission for other people not to treat you well.
I reckon the best representation of self-worth is how you treat yourself and in turn then treat others.
Yeah. What is Julian Pace's life purpose?
At the moment, I have one goal, which is 10 million lives in 10 years. That's my purpose. And people ask me what I'm going to do after 10 years. And well, if we don't get to 10 million, and I'll just extend it. And after that, I can't really give you an answer. But at the moment, my daily purpose and my life purpose is that, because I think so many people get lost in the idea of what they could become in life. I just want to stay focused on my first promises, and my first promises to myself and to this world were that. And I plan to absolutely deliver on that promise.
Beautiful. Mate, I cannot tell you how happy I am to have had this discussion with you, the first of our podcast. Julian, thank you so much, mate.
Pleasure, mate. Well done, buddy.
Thank you.
Good work.
If this episode of Aspirations and Dreams has brought up any concerns with you, please contact Lifeline.